There are stories about chosen ones, children with psychic powers, and cops with haunted pasts. But sometimes, the most powerful hero in the story is the one nobody sees coming, the one they dismiss as hysterical, as crazy, as a grieving mother who has lost her mind. This is the story of that hero. This is the story of Joyce Byres, a woman armed with Christmas lights, a telephone, and a mother's intuition so powerful it could hear a whisper from another dimension. Her war didn't start with a gunshot or a monster's roar, but with the quiet hum of a refrigerator in a small house on the edge of town and the dawning, terrifying silence of a son who was no longer there. Before her name became a synonym for frantic, wild-eyed determination, Joyce Byres was just a woman trying to keep her head above water. Her life in Hawkins, Indiana was a portrait in quiet struggle, a daily battle fought not against monsters, but against overdue bills, a thankless job, and the subtle, condescending judgment of a town that valued conformity above all else. She was a single mother, a distinction that in this small-minded world of 1983, Hawkins still carried a faint scent of failure and pity. Her ex-husband, Lonnie, was a ghost in their lives, a man who would drift in and out, leaving behind nothing but broken promises and a fresh layer of emotional debt. He was a constant, painful reminder of a life that had fractured, a dream that had soured. Joyce's entire world had been rebuilt around her two sons, Jonathan and Will. They were her everything, the twin pillars that held up her sky. Her love for them was a fierce, almost primal force, a current of energy that ran beneath the surface of her anxious, chain-smoking exterior. The town saw her as fragile, a little flighty, a woman perpetually on the verge of unraveling. They didn't see the core of case-hardened steel that lay beneath. They didn't understand that her anxiety was not a weakness, but a finely tuned radar for the well-being of her boys. Her life was a series of small, necessary sacrifices. She worked long, mind-numbing hours at Melvald's General Store, a downtown establishment that felt like a relic from another era. She sold twine and mousetraps, her mind always somewhere else, calculating how to stretch her meager paycheck to cover groceries and a new pair of shoes for Will. Her home was a reflection of her life, a little messy, a little chaotic, but filled with an undeniable warmth. The furniture was worn, the wallpaper was peeling, but the walls were covered in Will's colorful, fantastical drawings, each one a testament to the vibrant inner world she so fiercely nurtured in him. Her sons were two sides of her own resilience. Jonathan, the elder, was a quiet observer, a boy who had been forced to grow up too fast. He was the man of the house, a role he accepted with a stoic, brooding grace. He was an artist, his camera a shield that allowed him to look at the world without having to fully participate in it. He saw the cracks in Hawkins, the hypocrisy, the quiet desperation, and he captured it on film. His love for his mother and brother was a silent, powerful thing, expressed not in words, but in the protective way he watched over them. In the mixtapes he made for Will, portals to other, louder worlds of punk rock and rebellion. Will was the family's heart. He was a gentle, creative soul, a boy who was often teased for being sensitive, for being different. In a town that worshipped jocks, Will was an artist, a magic user, a dreamer. Joyce saw the beautiful, unique light in him and protected it with every fiber of her being. She encouraged his drawings, celebrated his Dungeons and Dragons campaigns, and defended him against the casual cruelty of a world that didn't understand him. The bond between the three of them was a fortress, a tiny, self-sufficient kingdom built on a foundation of love and shared struggle. They were outsiders, the Byres family, living on the fringe of a town that prized normalcy above all else. They didn't fit in, and they didn't particularly care to. They had each other. This was Joyce's world before the nightmare. A world of small joys and constant worries, a life held together by love, duct tape, and the sheer force of her will. She was a woman who was used to fighting, but she was about to be drafted into a war she couldn't possibly imagine. A war that would test the limits of her love, her sanity, and her belief in the impossible. The quiet hum of her life was about to be replaced by the terrifying static of another world, and she was the only one who would be able to hear the message in the noise. The night the world tilted on its axis began with the mundane. Joyce was working a late shift at Melvald's, her mind likely on bills and groceries, while her youngest son, Will, was locked in an epic 10-hour Dungeons and Dragons battle in Mike Wheeler's basement. The first inkling that something was wrong was a feeling, a primal thrum of maternal anxiety that woke her in the dead of night. It was a silence that was too loud, a stillness in the house that felt unnatural. She got up, her bare feet cold on the linoleum floor, and found the front door slightly ajar, the family dog, Chester, barking nervously into the empty darkness. A wave of panic, cold and sharp, washed over her. She checked the boys' rooms. Jonathan was there, asleep, a mountain of teenage limbs under a messy comforter, but Will's bed was empty. He wasn't there. The initial panic was a whirlwind of frantic, rational thoughts. He's at the Wheelers. He stayed over and forgot to call. He's with his father. She cycled through the possibilities, her hands shaking as she dialed the Wheelers' number, her voice tight with a fear she was trying to suppress. Karen Wheeler's sleepy, confused denial that Will was there was the first crack in the dam of her composure. The call to her ex-husband, Lonnie, was a descent into a familiar hell of his indifference and accusations. He wasn't there. The dam broke. The frantic calls to the police. The first conversation with a weary, skeptical Chief Hopper were a blur. He was all calm procedure and patronizing reassurance, his tone that of a man dealing with another hysterical mother. She could feel his dismissal through the phone line, and it only fueled her rising terror. He didn't understand. This was different. Her son was not a runaway. The true catalyst, the moment that tore a hole in her reality and set her on a path of impossible belief, came in the form of a phone call. The phone rang, its shrill cry cutting through the tense silence of her home. She snatched it up, screaming Will's name, and for a second, she heard it. A faint, garbled sound that could have been his voice, swallowed by a wave of crackling electrical static and a deep, guttural roar. Like a beast from a nightmare, the sound was terrifying, alien, but beneath it, she heard her son. She was sure of it. Then, the phone erupted in a violent surge of electricity, the plastic melting in her hand, the the shock throwing her against the wall. The line went dead. For anyone else, it would have been a faulty connection, a strange electrical anomaly. For Joyce, it was proof. It was contact. Will was alive, and he was somewhere terrible, somewhere he was in danger. This single event became the cornerstone of her faith. It was a piece of empirical data in a situation that defied all logic. The immediate psychological fallout was a complete shattering of her world. The rules no longer applied. Her son was not just missing, he was taken, pulled into the source of that terrifying noise. She tried to explain it to Hopper, to Jonathan, but her words sounded like madness. They saw a grieving mother, her mind broken by trauma, clinging to impossible straws. They didn't see what she saw. They didn't hear what she heard. She was alone, a solitary witness to an impossible truth. This was the inciting incident, not just of a missing boy, but of a mother's transformation. She was no longer just a struggling single mom. She was the first soldier in a war no one else knew had begun. Her only weapon, a mother's unshakable, crazy belief that her son was still out there, whispering to her through the static. In the days following Will's disappearance, Joyce Byres became a pariah in her own town, her grief and terror isolating her in a way she had never experienced before. While Hawkins organized search parties and shared concerned platitudes, Joyce was embarking on a different kind of search, one that took place not in the woods, but within the walls of her own home. She was not forming a faction of allies. She was becoming a singular figure of impossible faith, a woman whose unshakable conviction would be her only weapon against a world that was convinced she was losing her mind. Her descent into what others saw as madness began with another sign, another whisper from the other side. After the explosive phone call, the phenomena shifted. Will started communicating through electricity, through light. A lamp in his bedroom would flicker in response to her questions. A song he loved, "Should I Stay or Should I Go?" blared from his stereo seemingly on its own. These were not random occurrences. She knew it. There was a pattern, an intelligence behind it. She was not a scientist or a paranormal investigator. She was a mother, and she recognized the rhythm of her own child's consciousness. The true rise of her unique methodology came with a flash of desperate, brilliant inspiration. If Will could control one light, could he control many? She raced to Melvald's, her face a mask of frantic purpose, and bought every string of Christmas lights the store had. She went home, and with a manic energy transformed her living room into a crude, beautiful, and heartbreaking communication device. She painted the letters of the alphabet on her wall, a messy, sprawling Ouija board, and painstakingly hung a single colored light above each letter. Her house, once a symbol of her struggle, was now a shrine to her faith, a beacon in the darkness. The challenges she faced were immense and deeply personal. Her eldest son, Jonathan, watched her with a mixture of love and deep concern. He saw his mother, already so fragile, seemingly cracking under the pressure. He tried to reason with her, to ground her in the painful reality that Will was likely gone. "Mom, you're scaring me," he would plead, his words a painful reflection of the town's consensus. Chief Hopper, the one person with the power to truly help her, treated her with a weary, gentle pity. He would listen to her theories about the lights, his face a mask of professional sympathy, but his eyes were filled with the skepticism of a man who had seen too much real-world tragedy to believe in fairy tales. The town of Hawkins began to whisper. "Poor Joyce Byres," they would say. "She's finally snapped." She became a figure of tragic local lore, the crazy lady with the Christmas lights up in November. Her isolation was absolute. Her only ally was the ghostly, flickering presence of her son. The group dynamic was a dialogue between a mother and the ghost in her machine. She would sit for hours in the darkened living room, her voice hoarse, asking questions, her eyes darting across the wall, waiting for a response. "Will, honey, are you here?" she would ask. The light above YES would flicker. "Are you safe?" NO. What should I do? RUN. The messages were a lifeline and a torment, proof that he was alive and proof that he was in terrible danger. Her rivalry was not with a person, but with reality itself. She was fighting against the logical, rational world that told her she was wrong, that told her to give up, to grieve, to accept the unacceptable. She refused. Every flicker of light was a victory, a piece of evidence in a case only she was prosecuting. In her supposed madness, Joyce Byres was becoming the most lucid person in Hawkins, the only one who had pierced the veil and was actively communicating with the other side. The first major conflict for Joyce's unshakable belief system came in the form of the world's most brutal reality check, the discovery of her son's body. When state police divers pulled a small, lifeless form from the dark, cold waters of Sattler's Quarry, a wave of collective grief washed over Hawkins. The search was over. The mystery was solved. For everyone else, this was the tragic but definitive end of the story. For Joyce, it was an impossibility, a lie so profound it felt like a physical assault. The conflict was not a battle with a monster, but a war against a fact, a war she fought with the only weapon she had left, her gut. The news was delivered to her by Hopper, his face a mask of grim, professional sorrow. He had to tell her that the thing she had been denying, the outcome she had refused to accept, had come to pass. Her reaction was not the hysterical grief everyone expected. It was a cold, furious certainty. "I don't know what you think that thing is," she told him, her voice low and trembling with a rage that was almost terrifying to behold. "But that is not my son." Her refusal to accept the body was seen by everyone, including her own son Jonathan, as the final tragic stage of a mother's denial. It was the moment she had truly, irretrievably lost touch with reality. The aftermath of this discovery was a fresh hell. The town's pity intensified, now tinged with a weary frustration. Her ex-husband Lonnie slithered back into her life, not out of grief, but out of a ghoulish opportunism, hoping to cash in on the tragedy with a lawsuit. He tried to dismantle her communication wall, to literally tear down her faith, telling her it was time to stop, to accept it, to grieve. His presence was a violation, a profane intrusion into her sacred space of hope. She threw him out, her fury a protective shield around her, and the memory of her son. The true climax of this conflict, the moment that redefined the stakes for Joyce entirely, came in the wake of Will's funeral. The town had gathered, mourned, and buried an empty casket. Joyce had gone through the motions, her body present but her mind elsewhere, still listening for the whispers in the walls. After everyone was gone, she was alone in her house, the silence deafening. But then she heard it again, a scratching, a voice coming from inside the living room wall. It was Will. He was close. In a moment of pure, instinctual desperation, she grabbed a fire axe. This was her breaking point, but it was also her moment of ultimate, transcendent faith. She was no longer just listening, she was acting. She swung the axe, tearing a hole in the floral wallpaper, the plasterboard cracking and splintering under the force of her blows. She was literally tearing down the barrier between worlds with her bare hands. As she ripped away the plaster, she revealed not wood and insulation, but something else. A pulsating, fleshy, organic membrane, like the skin of some vast living creature. The wall was alive, and through a thin, almost transparent section of this membrane, she saw it. A dark, shadowy figure, tall and slender, with no face. The Demogorgon. It lunged towards her, its form pressing against the fleshy wall, and she stumbled back, screaming, a sound of pure, undiluted terror and, strangely, of vindication. She was not crazy. The monster was real. Will was real. And they were both trapped on the other side of that living, breathing wall. This conflict and its aftermath transformed her completely. She was no longer just a mother fighting for her lost son. She was a woman who had come face to face with the monster in the dark, and she now knew, with every fiber of her being, that she had to find a way to kill it. The year following the traumatic, world-bending events of 1983 was a fragile, lost era for Joyce Byres. She had her son back, a miracle she had willed into existence through sheer faith and determination. But the normalcy she desperately tried to reconstruct was built on a foundation of deep, unhealed trauma. Life in Hawkins returned to a semblance of its former self on the surface. But for Joyce, the world was now permanently haunted, every shadow holding the potential for a monster, every flickering light a possible message from a world she wished she could forget. Her primary focus was Will. She smothered him with a fierce, anxious love, her every action dictated by a paralyzing fear of losing him again. She watched him like a hawk, monitoring his every mood, his every cough. His nightmares were her nightmares. When he would wake up screaming, she would be there, holding him, her own heart pounding with a familiar terror. She was no longer just his mother. She was his guardian, his sentry, standing watch against the darkness she knew was still out there somewhere. This hypervigilance was a manifestation of her PTSD, a constant humming anxiety that she tried to mask with a forced cheerfulness. She was trying to create a safe, happy world for her boys, a world where monsters didn't exist, but she herself couldn't fully believe in it. It was during this period of fragile rebuilding that a new figure entered her life, Bob Newby. Bob was the manager of the local Radio Shack, a man so thoroughly, wonderfully normal, he seemed like a creature from another species. He was kind, nerdy, and optimistic, a beacon of gentle, uncomplicated decency in her chaotic world. He loved puzzles, Kenny Rogers and Joyce Byres. Their relationship was a tentative step back into the light for her. He represented a future she had thought was impossible. a future of quiet dinners, silly jokes, and the simple comfort of a good man's love. He knew about her episodes, as the town had called them, but he wasn't scared off. He was patient, understanding, and utterly devoted to her. He was, in every way, the anti-Lonnie, the anti-Hopper. He was just a nice guy. This new relationship was the centerpiece of her rebuilding phase. Bob became a part of their family. He would come over for dinner, helping the boys with their homework, charming them with his goofy humor and his genuine interest in their lives. He was trying to build a normal family with her, and for a while, it seemed like it might actually work. The psychological study of Joyce during this time would reveal a woman at war with herself. Part of her was desperate to embrace this new life, to let go of the past and fall into the simple, safe love that Bob offered. But another part of her could never fully relax. The shadow of the upside down was a permanent fixture in her mind. Every time Will had one of his episodes, every time he would freeze in place, his eyes wide with a terror she recognized all too well, she was pulled right back into the nightmare. Her secrets were a wall between her and Bob. How could she explain to this sweet, logical man that her son was having flashbacks to another dimension? How could she describe the monster in the wall, the feeling of the upside down's cold, damp air? She couldn't, so she hid it, compartmentalizing her trauma, presenting a brave, functioning face to the man she was falling in love with, all while privately battling a rising tide of fear. The isolation she had felt during Will's disappearance returned, albeit in a different form. She was no longer alone in her belief, but she was alone in the depth of her trauma, a veteran of a war no one else could truly comprehend. This quiet, lost era was a beautiful, fragile lie she was telling herself. She was rebuilding her life on top of an unhealed wound, and she didn't yet realize that the infection was not just in her son's mind, but was beginning to seep back into the very soil of Hawkins itself. The fragile peace Joyce had so carefully constructed began to crumble with the reemergence of the threat, this time in a far more insidious and personal form. It didn't come from the walls or the lights. It came from within her own son. Will's episodes, which she had tried to rationalize as a form of PTSD, began to change, to escalate. They were no longer just flashbacks. They were visions. He would describe a new monster, a colossal creature made of swirling black shadows and red lightning, a spider-like entity that blotted out the sky in his visions of the upside down. Joyce listened, her blood running cold, as her son described a new, even greater evil. The first signs of this new threat were subtle, manifesting in Will's behavior. He became withdrawn, his drawings growing darker, more chaotic. He would complain of being cold, even on warm days, his body temperature dropping to alarming levels. Joyce, with her finely honed maternal radar, knew this was more than just psychological trauma. This was a physiological change. The monster from his visions was not just haunting him, it was infecting him. The suspense built with each new, terrifying symptom. The true reemergence of the threat was confirmed through a series of frantic, abstract crayon drawings. Will, in a kind of trance, began to scribble furiously, filling page after page with what looked like a chaotic maze of black lines. He couldn't explain what he was drawing, only that he had to get it out. Joyce, in a moment of brilliant, intuitive insight, saw what no one else could. It wasn't chaos. It was a map. She began taping the dozens of drawings together, covering the walls, the floors, the entire surface of her house, transforming it once again into a massive communication device. As she pieced the puzzle together, a vast interconnected network of tunnels and vines took shape. She had mapped the enemy's territory, a secret subterranean empire that was spreading beneath Hawkins like a cancer. The sensory details of this period were chilling. The Byres house, once a place she was trying to fill with the warmth of her new life with Bob, became cold again. She was constantly checking the thermostat, piling blankets on a shivering Will, a physical battle against a supernatural cold that was emanating from her son. She could feel the wrongness of it, the creeping influence of the upside down reasserting itself in her home. Her discovery of the map led to a horrifying collaboration with Hopper. He had been investigating the blighted pumpkin patches, and when he saw her map, he recognized the patterns. Her son's internal nightmare matched the physical decay that was happening all over town. This confirmation was a moment of pure terror for Joyce. The threat was not just in Will's mind. It was real, it was growing, and her son was somehow at the center of it. The idea that Will was not just a victim, but now a vessel for the monster, a spy, was a horror beyond anything she had previously imagined. She was losing him all over again, not to another dimension, but to an internal invasion. This new threat was more terrifying because it was invisible, a battle being waged inside her child's body and soul. She was a mother watching her son be consumed from the inside out, and the only clues she had were a set of crayon drawings that looked like the ravings of a madman to everyone but her. The reemergence of the Upside Down's influence was not a sudden attack, but a slow, creeping possession, a psychological horror story that was unfolding in the one place she was supposed to feel safe, her own home. The possession of Will Byres created a new, desperate order among the heroes of Hawkins. The mission was no longer to find a missing boy, but to save him from the monster that was wearing him like a suit. Joyce was at the absolute center of this new faction, a frantic, determined mother orchestrating a war council in her own living room, the walls of which were now a strategic map of the enemy's territory. The team was a motley crew: Joyce, the intuitive heart; Hopper, the cynical muscle; Mike, the loyal friend; and the newest, most tragically out-of-his-depth member, Bob Newby. The internal conflicts began almost immediately. Joyce's fierce, almost feral protectiveness over Will put her at odds with everyone who tried to approach the problem with logic. When Dr. Owens and the scientist from Hawkins' lab suggested taking Will in for observation, she refused. She didn't trust them. The lab was the source of all this pain, a place of cold science that had never seen her son as anything more than a curiosity. She would not hand him over. This created a tense standoff, with Joyce as the sole guardian of her son, refusing to let the experts take control. Her relationship with Bob was also put under immense strain. Bob, the sweet, normal man, was suddenly thrust into a world of shadow monsters and interdimensional tunnels. He tried to help in the only way he knew how, with logic and love. He saw a traumatized boy and a stressed-out single mother, and his solution was a normal one. "We could move," he suggested, "away from all the bad memories." It was a kind, loving, and completely naive suggestion. Joyce had to gently explain that they couldn't run from this. The monster wasn't in Hawkins. It was inside her son. The introduction of Bob into this dark world disrupted the grim, unspoken chemistry that existed between Joyce and Hopper. Hopper understood the stakes, the danger. Bob understood love and puzzles. This created a subtle tension, with Joyce caught between the two men who represented two very different possible futures. The primary conflict for the group was how to fight a monster they couldn't see, one that was using Will as a host. They realized with dawning horror that Will was a spy. Every time they discussed their plans, the Mind Flayer was listening. The New Order had a mole, and the mole was the very person they were trying to save. This led to the ingenious, heartbreaking plan to communicate with the real Will. They took him to the garden shed, the one place from his childhood that the monster wouldn't know, and turned it into a makeshift interrogation room. They tied him to a chair, surrounding him with his own drawings, mementos from his past, trying to create a sensory cocoon that would reach the boy trapped inside the monster's consciousness. The chemistry of this scene was intense. Joyce, Hopper, and Mike worked together, a strange family unit trying to perform a psychic exorcism. Joyce would speak to her son, her voice a soothing balm of love and memory, trying to cut through the monster's control. It was through this process, using a coded system of taps, that they got their most vital piece of intelligence, a single, desperate message from the real Will. Close gate. This was the mission, but this new order was immediately tested. When Will's condition worsened, Joyce, against her better judgment, had to take him to the lab. There, Dr. Owens showed her the source of the infection, the massive, swirling gate to the upside down. He also showed her the danger of fighting back. When his soldiers used flamethrowers in the tunnels, Will's body convulsed in agony on the lab table. They were inextricably linked. They couldn't hurt the monster without hurting Will. This was the ultimate internal conflict, the core of their strategic nightmare. The faction was united in its goal, but paralyzed by the horrifying reality that to save the world, they might have to sacrifice the boy at the center of it all. The war against the Mind Flayer reached its catastrophic turning point at Hawkins' lab, a place of recurring trauma for Joyce Byres. The situation escalated into a full-blown tactical nightmare when the monster, using its psychic link to Will, orchestrated a devastating trap. It used Will's knowledge to lure a team of Dr. Owens' soldiers into the tunnel network, where they were ambushed and slaughtered by a swarm of demo dogs. But this was only the first part of the trap. The true horror was that this massacre was a diversion, a way to draw the lab's defenses away from the main building. The Mind Flayer then used Will to summon the entire Demodog army directly to the lab itself. The building went into lockdown, the power was cut, and Joyce found herself trapped once again in a sterile, white hallway, hunted by monsters from another dimension. This time, however, she wasn't alone. She was with Hopper, Mike, a comatose Will, Dr. Owens, and her boyfriend, Bob Newby. The tactical failure was immense. They had been completely outmaneuvered by a being of superior alien intelligence. The villain's trap had been sprung perfectly, turning the one place that was supposed to be a secure research facility into a death trap. The minute-by-minute narration of their desperate attempt to escape is a masterclass in tension. The hallways were dark, the only light coming from emergency strobes that cast terrifying, fleeting shadows. The air was filled with the guttural screeches of the demodogs and the panicked breaths of the survivors. From Joyce's perspective, this was her worst nightmare realized. She was back in the heart of the beast, and this time, the life of her son and the good, kind man she had just started to build a future with were on the line. The only way out was to restore the lab's power, which would reboot the computer system and unlock the electronic doors. The problem was that the control room was on the other side of the building, through a maze of monster-patrolled corridors, and the system itself ran on an archaic programming language, BASIC. In this moment of absolute desperation, the most unlikely hero emerged. Bob Newby, the nerdy, perpetually optimistic Radio Shack manager, was the only one who knew the language. He volunteered for the suicide mission. Joyce's reaction was one of pure terror. She pleaded with him not to go. She had already lost one man she loved to this fight. She couldn't bear to lose another. But Bob was resolute. "Easy peasy," he said, his catchphrase a brave, heartbreaking attempt at reassurance. The sequence of his journey through the lab, guided by Hopper over a walkie-talkie, was an agony for Joyce, who could only watch helplessly on the security monitors. He navigated the treacherous hallways, narrowly escaping death multiple times, his courage far outweighing his physical strength. He made it to the control room and, with shaking hands, successfully rebooted the system. The power came back on. The locks clicked open. He had done it. He had saved them. The shocking revelation of the scene's tragic end was a brutal, gut-wrenching twist. As Bob made a final, frantic dash for the lobby doors, just feet away from Joyce and safety, a demodog burst from a side room, tackling him to the ground. Joyce could only watch in horrified silence as the love of her life, the symbol of her hope for a normal future, was torn apart by a pack of monsters. Her scream was a raw, primal sound of pure anguish, the cry of a woman whose world had just been shattered for the second time. Hopper had to physically drag her away from the scene as they made their escape. The critical turning point was not just a strategic defeat, but a profound personal loss. The death of Bob Newby was the death of Joyce's dream of a life after the storm. The fall of Joyce Byres was not a fall into madness or despair, but a fall from the fragile hope she had so carefully constructed. Bob Newby was more than just a boyfriend. He was a symbol. He was the promise of a normal life, a future free from monsters and other dimensions. His brutal, heroic death in the lobby of Hawkins' lab was the violent destruction of that promise. In the immediate aftermath, as Hopper dragged her away from the horrific scene, she was a woman in shock, her mind a numb void of grief and disbelief. This was her great transformation. The anxious, sometimes frantic mother was burned away in the fire of this new loss. And what rose from the ashes was a soldier. The internal monologue that had once been a whirlwind of fear for her son was now a cold, quiet storm of pure, focused rage. The monster had not just taken a man she loved, it had taken her future, and she was going to make it pay. The external pressures of their situation, trapped in a house with a possessed will, surrounded by an army of demodogs, would have broken a lesser person. But for Joyce, it was a clarifying force. Her grief was a lens that brought the enemy into sharp, clear focus. There was no more room for fear, no more time for tears. There was only the mission. Her final choice in this transformation was to put aside her own shattering grief and focus entirely on saving her son and destroying the Mind Flayer. She became the strategic center of the group, her home, once again, the war room. When the group hatched the plan to exorcise the monster from Will by overheating him, she was the one who led the charge. She looked at her son, tied to his bed, his body convulsing as the monster within him fought back, and she did not flinch. She cranked up the heat, her face a mask of grim determination. She was willing to push her son to the brink of death to save his soul, a terrible choice that only a mother who had been through hell could make. This was a new Joyce. The woman who had once been defined by her vulnerability was now defined by her strength. She had faced down the monster in her wall. She had walked into another dimension, and she had watched the love of her life be devoured. There was nothing left in the world that could scare her. Her relationship with the other characters shifted. She was no longer just the mom of the group. She was a fellow warrior, a veteran whose experience and resolve were respected. She and Hopper were now true partners, their bond forged in shared trauma and a grim, unspoken understanding. The fall of her dream of a normal life was the rise of Joyce Byres, the monster hunter. She had always been a fighter, but her fight had been a defensive one, a struggle to protect. Now, her fight was offensive. She was no longer just trying to survive the storm, she was going to end it. This transformation was crucial for the final conflict. To defeat the Mind Flayer, the group needed more than just Hopper's brawn or Eleven's power. They needed Joyce's heart, a heart that had been broken and reforged into a weapon of unbreakable will. She was the emotional core of the resistance, her love for her children the ultimate fuel for their fight. The woman who had started this journey with a string of Christmas lights was now ready to burn the whole damn thing to the ground. A year after the harrowing events at Hawkins' lab and the tragic loss of Bob Newby, Joyce Byres was in a state of suspended animation. The immediate threat was gone. The gate was sealed, but the ghosts of her past were constant companions. It was during this period of fragile peace that a new, seemingly mundane mystery began to percolate, introducing a new antagonist and a new direction for her life. It all started with the magnets on her refrigerator. They kept falling off. It was a small, strange annoyance, something she initially dismissed. But her instincts, now permanently honed by years of supernatural chaos, told her something was wrong. This wasn't normal. This nagging feeling, this sense that the world was once again slightly off kilter, was the reemergence of her role as the story's primary, intuitive detective. She became obsessed with the phenomenon, turning her home into a makeshift physics lab, trying to understand the source of the magnetic anomaly. This obsession put her on a direct path back to the one person who would take her crazy theories seriously, Jim Hopper. Their investigation into the magnets reignited their complicated, powerful dynamic. This was the introduction of a new protagonist in her life. Not a new character, but a new version of her relationship with Hopper. The shared trauma and the unspoken what-ifs between them had blossomed into a palpable romantic tension. Their partnership was no longer just about saving the world. It was about navigating their own deeply felt but unacknowledged feelings for each other. They were two broken, lonely people who found a strange comfort in each other's damaged company. Their investigation led them from abandoned farmhouses to the gleaming, neon-lit halls of the new Starcourt Mall. It was here that they stumbled upon the story's new antagonist faction, the Russians. They discovered that a clandestine Soviet operation was taking place deep beneath the mall, a secret base where a team of scientists was trying to build their own machine, the key to reopen the gate to the Upside Down. The demagnetization was a side effect of their powerful reality-bending experiments. This discovery fundamentally altered the trajectory of Joyce's story. The enemy was no longer a shadowy, supernatural entity from another dimension. It was a tangible, human army with a clear geopolitical motive. The conflict shifted from a horror story to a Cold War spy thriller. The skills she had learned fighting monsters, her quick thinking, her resourcefulness, her sheer, stubborn refusal to back down, were now being applied to a world of spies, assassins, and secret codes. She was no longer just a mom fighting for her kids. She was a civilian accidentally drafted into an international espionage plot. Her role evolved. She became an active participant in the action, a co-conspirator with Hopper. Together, they infiltrated a secret Russian property where they were ambushed by a hulking, implacable assassin named Grigory. Their narrow escape, which involved kidnapping a sweet-natured Russian scientist named Alexei, threw them headlong into a new, more dangerous world. The introduction of this new human antagonist forced Joyce to become a different kind of hero. She was no longer just reacting to supernatural events. She was now on the run from a very real, very human threat. Her life in constant danger. This new conflict pushed her and Hopper closer together, their survival dependent on their trust in each other, setting the stage for a relationship that would be forged in the fires of a secret war being fought under a food court. The second major conflict for Joyce Byres was a frantic cross-country chase that felt like a paranoid spy thriller from the 1970s. After kidnapping the Russian scientist Alexei, she and Hopper were officially fugitives, hunted by both the shadowy Russian forces and, for all they knew, their own government. They were completely on their own, two ordinary people caught in an extraordinary international conspiracy. The villain's new methodology was one of relentless, high-tech pursuit, with the unstoppable assassin Grigory as its face. He was always one step behind them, a Terminator in a cheap suit, his presence a constant, looming threat. The escalated stakes were no longer just about the fate of Hawkins, but about preventing a new Cold War catastrophe. Joyce and Hopper had to adapt their own methodology. They were no longer fighting a monster they couldn't see. They were evading an enemy who could be anywhere, an enemy with eyes and ears all over town. Their first move was to find someone who could translate what Alexei was saying. This led them to the only person in Hawkins, eccentric and paranoid enough to believe their story, Murray Bauman. The journey to Murray's fortified warehouse bunker was a tense, nerve-wracking affair. At a gas station, they were cornered by Grigori, and Hopper, in a brutal, messy fight, barely managed to fend him off, allowing them to escape. Their time at Murray's bunker was a pressure cooker of conflicting personalities and undeniable chemistry. Murray, with his love of vodka and conspiracy theories, acted as their reluctant translator and an even more reluctant relationship counselor. He saw the crackling, unspoken romantic tension between Joyce and Hopper immediately and took it upon himself to force the issue, much to their shared, grumpy denial. From Joyce's perspective, her feelings for Hopper were a complicated, tangled knot of grief, gratitude, and a deep, abiding affection for a man who had been through the fire with her. But in the midst of a life or death crisis, there was no time for romance. The conflict was both external and internal. She was fighting for her life, while also fighting her own feelings for the broken, heroic man by her side. With Alexei's translation, they learned the full extent of the Russian plan to use the massive energy from the key to reopen the gate. They had to get this information to the authorities, but every phone was tapped. This led them to the town's 4th of July fun fair, a place of loud noises and bright lights, a perfect cover for a secret call. The fun fair, however, quickly became a death trap. Grigory and his men descended, turning the festive midway into a hunting ground. The chase through the fun fair was a terrifying ordeal, culminating in a fight in a hall of mirrors where Hopper once again narrowly escaped with his life. But the true tragedy of the night was the assassination of Alexei. While Joyce and Hopper were creating a diversion, Grigori found the gentle scientist and shot him, a single, silenced pop amidst the joyful cacophony of the fair. The loss of Alexei was a devastating blow. He was not just their key to understanding the Russian plan. He had become a friend, a sweet, innocent casualty of a war he never should have been a part of. His death solidified the stakes for Joyce. The Russians were not just spies. They were killers. There was no more running. They had to go on the offensive. The plan shifted from escape to infiltration. They had to get back to the mall, get into the base, and destroy the key themselves. It was a suicide mission, but it was their only option. The second major conflict had pushed Joyce from a person of interest to a full-blown combatant, a woman who was now ready to take the fight directly to the enemy. The final battle at Starcourt Mall was the ultimate test of Joyce Byres' courage, a culmination of every trial she had endured since the night her son disappeared. Her role in this climax was not that of a bystander or a victim, but of a key player, a woman who held the fate of the world in her hands and was forced to make an impossible, devastating choice. The mission was to infiltrate the secret Russian base deep beneath the mall and use the two-key system to trigger a self-destruct sequence on the key, the massive dimensional drill that was tearing a new hole into the upside down. Disguised in stolen Russian uniforms, she and Hopper navigated the labyrinthine corridors of the base, their every step fraught with danger. They were a two-person army on a suicide run, their success dependent on a combination of Hopper's brawn, her quick thinking, and the remote guidance of a group of children. The tension of the infiltration was immense, but it was the final moments in the control room that defined her role in this story. She and Hopper reached the control panel, the two key slots waiting. They were so close. But then, the relentless Russian assassin, Grigory, appeared, blocking their path. As Hopper engaged the assassin in a brutal life-or-death struggle on the gantry surrounding the crackling energy of the key, Joyce could only watch, her heart pounding in her chest. She was a soldier providing cover, her eyes scanning the control panels, waiting for her moment. The moment of sacrifice was built with agonizing, slow-motion precision. Hopper, in a final, heroic effort, managed to throw Grigory into the energy field of the key, vaporizing him. But the victory was short-lived. The machine was overloading, alarms blaring, the chamber about to explode. Joyce was at the control panel, her hand on her key, but Hopper was trapped on the other side of the room, the path back to her blocked by a shimmering wall of deadly energy. There was no time. There was no way out for him. The emotional weight of this moment was crushing. They looked at each other across the chaos, a silent, heartbreaking conversation passing between them. His face was not one of fear, but of sad, grim acceptance. He had run out of road. He gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod. It was his last order. It was his permission. It was his goodbye. For Joyce, this was an impossible choice. To save the world, to save her children, she had to sacrifice the man she had finally, unspokenly, come to love. Her entire being screamed in protest, but she knew what she had to do. With tears streaming down her face, her body shaking with a choked sob, she turned her key. Hopper turned his. The machine exploded in a blinding flash of white light, the shockwave sealing the gate and seemingly disintegrating everything in the chamber, including Jim Hopper. This was her devastating loss, her ultimate sacrifice. She had saved the world, but the price was the one man who truly understood the hell she had been through. She had lost Bob to the monsters of the Upside Down, and now she had lost Hopper to the monsters of the human world. The war had taken everything from her again. In the immediate aftermath of Hopper's apparent death, Joyce Byres was a woman adrift in a sea of fresh, profound grief. The victory at Starcourt Mall was a hollow one, its triumph completely overshadowed by the personal, devastating loss of the man she had sacrificed. The psychological fallout was a quiet, stoic devastation. She had become so accustomed to loss, so practiced in the art of grieving, that her sorrow manifested not as a loud, frantic panic, but as a deep, weary ache in the very core of her being. She had to be strong for the kids. She had to be strong for a now orphaned 11, who had just lost her second father figure. Joyce, in her own moment of deepest grief, once again put the needs of her children, all of them, before her own. Her primary emotional focus shifted to 11. She saw a mirror of her own loss in the girl's eyes, and her maternal instincts, the most powerful force in her universe, took over. She made the decision to become 11's legal guardian, to take this broken, powerless, grieving child into her home and into her heart. It was an act of profound love and resilience, a choice to build a new family out of the ashes of the old one. This led to her next major decision. She had to leave Hawkins. The town was no longer a home. It was a mausoleum. Every street corner, every store, held a memory of Hopper, of Bob, of the terror they had endured. It was a place of ghosts. To heal, to give her children any chance at a normal life, she had to escape. The final scenes of her packing up her house, the same house where she had once fought a monster with Christmas lights, were filled with a poignant, heartbreaking sadness. It was the end of an era. The move to the fictional town of Lenora Hills, California, was a desperate flight from the past. She was trying to outrun the darkness, to find a place where the shadows of the upside down couldn't reach them. The emotional fallout continued in their new life. She tried to create a sense of normalcy, but it was a fragile, unconvincing performance. She worked from home as a telephone salesperson, her voice a cheerful professional mask that hid her inner turmoil. She watched as Eleven struggled to fit in at her new school, as Jonathan drifted into a new stoner persona, as Will continued to carry the silent trauma of his past. Her family was safe, but they were not happy. They were a collection of traumatized individuals, all trying and failing to pretend they were okay. The psychological effect of Hopper's loss was a constant, dull pain. She kept his memory alive in small ways, but she also tried to move on, to accept that he was gone. She was a widow of a war no one knew had been fought. This period was one of quiet endurance, of a mother trying to hold her broken family together with sheer force of will. She had faced down monsters and spies, but now she faced a more insidious enemy, the quiet, creeping despair that comes after the battle is over, when all that's left are the ghosts and the grief. The fragile, grief-stricken peace of Joyce's life in California was shattered by the arrival of a package from an unknown sender in Russia. It was a small porcelain doll, a strange and cryptic object that immediately set her finely tuned danger senses on high alert. This was the beginning of the final push, the preparation for an end she never thought she would have to face. Inside the doll was a secret, coded message. It was a ransom note, a demand for money, but it was the single scrawled sentence at the bottom that made her world stop turning. Hop is alive. Hope, an emotion she had tried so desperately to kill, exploded in her chest. It was a terrifying, exhilarating, and seemingly impossible idea, but after everything she had been through, Joyce Byres had learned to believe in the impossible. This single note was the catalyst for her next great mission. She was no longer just a grieving mother. She was a woman with a purpose, a soldier being called back into service for one last, desperate campaign. Her first move was to call the one person in the world who would understand, the one person as fluent in the language of conspiracy and paranoia as she was. Murray Bauman. She flew to his home, the doll clutched in her hand like a holy relic. The rallying the troops moment was a tense, frantic strategy session between the two of them in Murray's bunker. He was skeptical at first, but she convinced him. Her certainty was, as always, a force of nature. The plan they hatched was audacious, reckless, and incredibly dangerous. The note gave them instructions. Bring $40,000 to a rendezvous point in the remote, frozen wilderness of Nome, Alaska. There, they would meet a pilot, a smuggler named Yuri, who would then fly to the secret Russian prison where Hopper was being held and facilitate the exchange. It was a spy movie plot, a long shot based on the word of an anonymous Russian source. But for Joyce, any shot, no matter how slim, was worth taking. The preparation for this journey was a testament to her resourcefulness and determination. She drained her bank accounts, cashed in every bond, gathering the ransom money. She was betting her entire life, her entire future, on this one desperate hope. The character talks before the storm were between her and Murray, two unlikely partners about to embark on a mission into the heart of enemy territory. Murray, with his black belt in karate and his encyclopedic knowledge of Russian culture, was the brains and the brawn. Joyce was the heart and the will. Their dynamic was a mixture of bickering and a deep, shared understanding. They were the only two people on Earth who could pull this off. As she and Murray boarded the plane to Alaska, Joyce was a woman transformed. Once again, the weary, grieving mother was gone, replaced by a determined, focused operative. She was on her way to rescue the man she loved from the frozen edge of the world, and she would let nothing, not spies, not monsters, not the entire Soviet Union, stand in her way. The final confrontation for Joyce Byres was not a battle against a supernatural entity, but a gritty, real-world infiltration of a high-security Soviet prison in the heart of Kamchatka. It was a climax that tested her courage, her ingenuity, and her capacity for violence in ways she had never anticipated. The mission went catastrophically wrong from the start. Yuri, the eccentric pilot they were meant to trust, betrayed them. He drugged them, tied them up, and planned to hand them over to the KGB along with Hopper for a triple reward. But he underestimated Joyce Byres. She and Murray, using a combination of Murray's karate and Joyce's sheer, ferocious will, managed to overpower him and crash-land his plane in the Russian wilderness. Now, they were not just on a rescue mission. They were fugitives in a hostile country with their only asset, Yuri, as their prisoner. Her plan had to evolve. They couldn't ransom Hopper out. They had to break him out. Disguised as Yuri and his captive, Murray, Joyce managed to bluff her way into the gulag itself. The tension was immense. She was a small-town mom from Indiana, walking into one of the most brutal prisons on Earth, surrounded by hardened soldiers and a dark secret she couldn't yet comprehend. The climax of her journey was a stunning display of her growth as a character. While Hopper and his fellow prisoners were being forced to fight a captive Demogorgon in a pit for the guards' entertainment, Joyce and Murray, from a control room high above, staged their own assault. The interweaving perspectives of this battle were crucial. Hopper, below, was fighting for his life, a gladiator in a frozen arena. Joyce, above, became his unexpected angel, his eye in the sky. She used her quick thinking to manipulate the prison's electronic systems, opening and closing doors, creating diversions, guiding Hopper and his fellow prisoner, Dmitri, through the chaos. She was no longer just a frantic mother. She was a tactical commander, a natural field operative. The final confrontation was a collaborative effort. As Hopper trapped the Demogorgon in a narrow corridor, it was Joyce who slammed the heavy steel doors shut, saving his life. Their reunion, in the midst of this fiery, bloody chaos, was a moment of breathtaking relief. They, had found each other. But the battle wasn't over. They discovered the full extent of the prison's horrors, a menagerie of captive demodogs and a swirling captured piece of the mind flayer. Joyce understood immediately. The creatures were all connected. This was a chance to help their kids, who were fighting their own battle back in Hawkins. She became a key part of the plan to destroy the creatures, to strike a blow against the hive mind. Her final confrontation was not just about saving Hopper, it was about saving everyone. She had gone from a woman who fought a monster in her living room to a woman who helped orchestrate an assault on the heart of the enemy's power, thousands of miles from home. In the immediate, fiery aftermath of the battle in the Kamchatka prison, Joyce Byres finally had her moment of resolution. Standing amidst the smoking wreckage of the prison yard, surrounded by the charred remains of monsters and men, she was reunited with Jim Hopper. It was a reunion that had been a year in the making, a moment earned through impossible odds, international travel, and a healthy dose of sheer, stubborn will. The resolution of her long, agonizing separation from him was not a grand, sweeping, cinematic kiss in the rain. It was something far more real, more earned. It was a quiet, breathless moment of two people who had been through hell simply looking at each other, the relief and love in their eyes saying more than words ever could. They had found each other again, and in the heart of that frozen, violent wasteland, they were finally, truly home. But their personal resolution was immediately followed by the dawning horror of a new, larger conflict. They had won their battle, but the war was far from over. With the help of Yuri, they escaped the prison, but their journey home was not a victory lap. It was a grim race against time. They knew that the fight in Russia was inextricably linked to the fight in Hawkins, and they had to get back to their kids. The aftermath of their escape was a period of tense, hopeful travel. They were a strange, cobbled-together family unit. Joyce, the resilient mother; Hopper, the reborn warrior; Murray, the eccentric intellectual; Dmitri, the redeemed Russian soldier; and Yuri, their disgruntled, peanut-butter-hoarding pilot. The losses they had sustained were immense, the loss of a year, the trauma of the prison. But their reunion was a powerful balm. The quiet moments on the plane, the planning, the shared glances between her and Hopper were the resolution of their long unspoken romance. There was no more denial, no more will they, won't they. They were a unit, a partnership forged in the most extreme circumstances imaginable. Their victory in Russia was a critical blow to the hive mind, a strategic success that had directly aided their children back in America. Joyce's role in this was central. Her initial crazy obsession with her falling magnets had been the catalyst for this entire chain of events. Her refusal to accept Hopper's death, her faith against all odds, was the reason any of them were alive. The immediate aftermath was a testament to her core strength. She had gone from a victim of supernatural events to a key player who could influence their outcome on a global scale. The resolution was not just about getting the man back. It was about Joyce fully stepping into her power, not as a psychic or a superhero, but as an ordinary woman whose extraordinary love and determination made her one of the most formidable forces in the war against the darkness. Joyce's return to Hawkins was not the triumphant homecoming she had earned. She had gone to the ends of the earth, infiltrated a Soviet super prison, and rescued the man she loved, only to arrive back in a town that was actively dying. The true cost of Vecna's temporary defeat was a sight of pure apocalyptic horror. 4 massive, fiery gates had ripped through the landscape, converging on the town's center, creating a bleeding, cross-shaped wound in the fabric of reality. The Upside Down was no longer a parallel dimension. It was here, its toxic, spore-filled atmosphere seeping into the air, its alien, vine-like tendrils choking the life out of the familiar woods and fields of her home. From Joyce's perspective, this was the ultimate cruel joke. She had just escaped a frozen, man-made hell, only to find that Hawkins had become a new, even more terrifying one. The personal cost was etched on the faces of her children. She reunited with Will and Jonathan, with 11, in a series of tearful, desperate embraces. But she could see the trauma in their eyes, the exhaustion of a battle fought and barely won. She learned of Eddie Munson's heroic sacrifice, another child lost to this endless war. And she learned of Max, lying in a hospital bed in a coma, her body broken, her mind a blank, empty space that even 11 couldn't find. The victory her children had achieved was a Pyrrhic one, a temporary halt to a plan that had, for all intents and purposes, succeeded. The wider consequences were all around her. The town she had lived in her entire life was in ruins. A massive earthquake was the official story, a flimsy government lie that was already starting to fray at the edges. The ground trembled with aftershocks, and the sky was filled with an ominous, permanent red haze. The citizens were fleeing, abandoning their homes, turning Hawkins into a ghost town. Unraveling the true cost for Joyce was the dawning, soul-crushing realization that all their previous victories, all their sacrifices, Bob's death, Hopper's death, had only been delaying the inevitable. They hadn't been winning a war. They had been patching leaks in a crumbling dam. Now, the dam had broken. She had gone through hell to bring Hopper back, to reunite her family, but the home she had brought him back to was being consumed. The cost was the loss of the future she had just reclaimed. The dream of a quiet, normal life with Hopper and the kids. A life of simple dinners and comfortable silences was once again an impossible fantasy. There could be no peace, no normalcy, as long as the Upside Down was bleeding into their world. The true cost was the understanding that the fight was not over. In fact, the final, most desperate battle had just begun, and the enemy was no longer at the gates. The gates were wide open, and the war was now for the planet itself. The long-term legacy of Joyce Byres is that of a woman who was consistently underestimated and who consistently proved everyone wrong. Her faith was the spark that lit the entire resistance. The impact she has had on the story is that of its unwavering emotional core. While other characters fought with their fists, their wits, or their psychic powers, Joyce fought with her heart. Her fierce, unconditional love for her children was the driving force behind the events of the first season. Her resilience in the face of unimaginable loss, losing Will, then Bob, then Hopper, is a testament to her incredible inner strength. She began her journey as a character the world and the narrative perceived as hysterical, a fragile single mother cracking under the pressure of grief. But her supposed hysteria was, in fact, a finely tuned intuition, a maternal instinct so powerful it became a form of superpower. Her legacy is the validation of that instinct. She was the first to know Will was alive, the first to communicate with the other side, the first to believe in the impossible. She is the ultimate survivor, a woman who has walked through hell and back, not once, but multiple times, and has emerged not hardened and cynical, but with her capacity for love and hope, however battered, still intact. The new status quo sees her fully transformed. She's no longer just a mom. She's a warrior, a veteran, a core member of the command team preparing for the final battle. Her partnership with Hopper is no longer a question mark, but a solid, battle-tested alliance. She has taken 11 in, becoming the mother the girl never had, cementing her role as the matriarch of this strange, broken, and beautiful found family. The lasting scars of her journey are deep. She is a woman who will forever be haunted by the ghosts of her past, by the memory of the men she has lost, and the horrors her children have endured. She will likely never feel truly safe again. The sight of a flickering light or a falling magnet will always trigger a flicker of that old, familiar fear. But these scars are also a source of her strength. They are a reminder of what she has survived, of what she is fighting for. She is no longer afraid of being seen as crazy. She has learned to trust her own instincts above all else. Her impact on the other characters is profound. She taught Hopper how to feel again. She gave Jonathan the stability he needed to find his own path. She gave Will a reason to fight his way back from the dark. And she gave 11 a mother's love, a gift that may prove to be the most powerful weapon in their arsenal. The long-term legacy of Joyce Byres is the story of how an ordinary woman, armed with nothing but love and a stubborn refusal to give up, became one of the most important figures in a war for the fate of the world. She is the heart of Hawkins, and her steady, resilient beat is what keeps them all fighting. She began as a woman on the edge, a frantic mother whose desperate pleas were dismissed as the ravings of a mind broken by grief. They called her crazy when she said the lights were talking to her. They called her delusional when she said the body in the quarry was not her son. They saw a fragile, hysterical woman, and they were wrong. They failed to see the core of unbreakable steel, the fierce, primal power of a mother's love. She journeyed from a pariah to a prophet, a woman who took an axe to her own wall to prove that the monster was real. She faced down demons, both supernatural and bureaucratic, lost 2 men she loved to a war no one else could see, and walked into another dimension to bring her son home. She is a testament to the idea that the greatest strength is not the absence of fear, but the courage to fight in spite of it. But now, as she stands with her reunited family in a dying town, the sky bleeding red and the ashes of another world falling around them, one final question remains. After a lifetime spent fighting to protect her family from a darkness that always finds them, can Joyce Byres finally build a peaceful home? Or is her destiny to be the eternal, loving guardian at the gates of hell?